Hello again, my name is Matt Ottewill and welcome to this, the third video in the series, the 40-year home studio build. If you've watched previous videos, you'll know that this series is all about the journey I've taken from bedroom studio to this, the studio of my dreams. Today I'm going to talk about effects processors. I still have some hardware processors in the studio, but like you, I use lots of plugins as well. And I want to talk about the journey from the 1970s when we had no effects to the slow arrival of affordable effects in the late to mid 1980s, right up to today when we can have any effect we could possibly want. Before I talk about the effects gear in this studio, I want to talk a little bit about the availability of affordable effect processors. And back in the 1970s, when I started my interest in home recording, there really was nothing affordable. We had guitar processors, and if you were lucky, you might have a tape echo delay. I think we did find one in a second-hand shop. I can't remember what it was. Maybe not an Echoplex, something cheaper, I think. But there really was very, very little that we had available. So all of our early recordings were just dry. Certainly we had no good acoustical spaces and certainly no extra microphones to mic up ambience. We had simple ceramic microphones or dynamic microphones. So effects were really something that wasn't possible. And the first time I used an effects processor is when I went to my first commercial, which was a demo studio, owned by the manager of Susie and the Banshees, and that was a 4-track studio in the basement of their management offices in the Barbican. And the engineer there, James Little, who was absolutely superb, managed to get the most amazing sounds out of a spring reverb, which was hanging on the wall. If you've not seen one before, they were like a bit of piping. We also had a Roland chorus, and that was it. That was all the effects we had. And when I started to build my own studios in the early 1980s, I couldn't even afford those. So getting hold of decent effects was almost impossible. Remember, this was the time when digital effects were just becoming available and they were hugely expensive. The Lexicon effects, which is what everybody wanted, of course, were thousands and thousands of pounds, and later the AMS and the Eventide effects. Then more affordable digital reverb started to become available, like the Ursa Major Space Station, and that arrived in a studio I worked in, which was an 8-track studio. It was a revelation, but it still didn't sound that great to me. Certainly the algorithms did not sound smooth, they didn't sound very musical. I know that there's a lot of talk about how great that unit is out there on the forums, but I didn't find it useful. Now, in fact, the first affordable digital effects processor arrived around about 85, 86, and that was the Yamaha SPX90. It's 16-bit, but the sample rate is around about 31 kilohertz, and it did sound fairly metallic and ringy to me. It was suitable for some sounds, but not everything, and it certainly didn't deliver the smooth kind of reverb I was hearing on those professional records. Of course, that reverb was mostly supplied by the Lexicon 224 and perhaps echo chambers and plate reverbs. Of course, an echo chamber is a small room in the studio which has been acoustically set up. There's a speaker at one end, a couple of microphones at the other end, and the sound bounces around and is captured and fed back to the mixing desk. We didn't have anything like that. We certainly didn't have plate reverbs. They were expensive too, and they were only installed in the most professional studios. Finally, we got the Lexicon LXP1. That was a small unit with preset reverbs in it. If I remember rightly, you could edit it with a remote control, and there might have been a decay control on it. And that was the first reverb that I could use that sounded good to me. As the 1990s progressed, the availability and affordability of quality outboard effects processors improved, mainly due to the improved quality of algorithms, and also the affordability and power of electronic components. So I and many other home studio owners were able to buy multiple devices, whereas previously we'd only had one or two. And of course, eBay was the great place to buy these devices. Although it's no longer necessary for home studio owners to have outboard hardware effect processors, Many of us who have used them over the years have a kind of relationship with them. We love the sound of them, we love using them, and we continue to do so. Remember that all devices have creative potential. They all offer something unique, however modest they are in terms of price, and therefore we sometimes want to go to them just to create a particular effect or a particular vibe. And sometimes it's just nostalgia, of course. You remember using a particular device and a particular program on a recording that you really like and you want to use it again. So let's begin by talking about the Lexicon PCM91. This is the reverb that I always wanted. Well, perhaps I would have preferred to have had a 480 or 960, but those devices are overkill for a home studio. So the PCM series is the middle ground between the budget processors and the high end. They do run some of the high end algorithms in them and they sound fantastic. So the timeline was the PCM60, the PCM70, the PCM90 and then the 91. The 80 is more about time domain effects and I've never owned one of those. So this device has been on a vocal plate setting for the last 20 years or so. I bought it from eBay. It was about £500 or £600, I believe, and it's still the device that I use on all my vocals. Next up we have the TC Electronic M3000, and this is a device that creates very realistic ambience and it's used a lot in post-production and film. It was an expensive device. I bought this one new. It's got 2 effect engines in it, so you can have 2 effects simultaneously running in it. There is absolutely no need to have a device like this anymore. This can all be done in software with plugins. The algorithms are perfectly good enough. But at the time I bought it, this was the closest thing to having realistic sounding room spaces, digital emulations of course. Next up here we have 3 Yamaha reverbs. Initially I didn't like the Yamaha reverbs because I wanted a Lexicon and didn't have one. Having brought a Lexicon, I can now appreciate their unique characters, and I've got a Pro R3 here, which I think is the device that appears in the high-end digital Yamaha mixing desks. And very strangely, it has no digital I/O, which is very strange for a company that pioneered digital audio. I then have the Rev500, which I love, is one of my favourite reverbs. It sounds good, it has none of the ringiness or metallic quality of the SPX90 series, and it's got really beautiful simple controls on the front of it, so it's very easy to choose an algorithm and edit it. And finally I've got a Rev5. I had a Rev7 and that was a processor that in the studio back in the 1970s most frustrated me because I wanted to get a good sound out of it and I couldn't. Now I have a Rev5 because the Rev7 died. I tried to repair it and it was taking me so long. I realised that these reverb units were fairly cheap on eBay, maybe 25 years ago. So I got this Rev5 for about $90, I think it was. And I really like it. It's unlike the Rev7, which is 16-bit 31 kilohertz. The Rev5 is 16-bit 44.1 kilohertz. So the quality is a little higher, but that's irrelevant. It's a character reverb. I have 2 primary time domain outboard effects processors that I use. The first one is a TC Electronic Fireworks, and this can produce various effects. It has effects blocks, and you can kind of string them all together, including of course pitch shifting and distortion, phasing, flanging and delays, and even ambience. There is no need to have this device anymore. You can do this much better in a DAW by stringing effects and plugins together there. This has got a fairly fiddly interface, and I like it, and I've used it for a long time, but I wouldn't recommend buying this one. Initially it was very, very expensive, and I think I waited probably 15 years until I managed to get one for about £300 or £400. The next device is hands down my favourite time domain effect device, and it's the Korg SDD 1200. It's a stereo device, and it's basically a digital delay, and with it you can create all of the time domain effects except for multi-tap, of course. You can do phasing, flanging, chorus, automatic double tracking, slapback and conventional delay effects. I love it. It's hands-on. It sounds absolutely brilliant. There's probably nothing it does that you can't do in a plugin, but there's something about the way this works and having these knobs on the front of it so you can grab them and mess about with them with two hands that I really, really love. So that's it for today's video. I hope you got something out of it. I will be back in a few weeks' time with a video on compression and equalization. My name's Matt Ottewill, and thanks for watching.